All right, gang. We're gonna get into another episode of The Leap in just a second here. Waiting for some folks to trickle in, getting my shit together, as per usual. All right, we'll get this going in just a second here. Super excited about this week's guest. Get her up on stage. Oh, we've got a pretty awesome episode coming. All right. Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Super excited to chat today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Me too. I'm excited. Can you hear me? Okay, because I got
Yeah, you sound great.
little headphones in. Okay.
You look great. We're doing great.
Amazing.
So I'm just gonna do a quick little intro just to get people sort of oriented, and then we'll dive right in.
Perfect.
So for folks who are just joining us, welcome to The Leap. I'm Renock. I am the co-founder and CEO of Wethos, which is a software platform that helps freelancers form what we're calling virtual studios. So we make it really easy to price complex projects and split payments with collaborators. Every week, I interview a different creative entrepreneur about their journey taking the leap to starting their own business. This week, super excited for our guest, and we're going to dig into some really, really great topics. Lola Adewuya, am I saying that right?
Close. Adewuya.
Adewuya. Oh, I really thought I had it.
So close.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Sorry, say it one more time so I can make sure I do it right.
Adewuya.
Adewuya. Okay. Lola Adewuya.
Yep.
I love the way that rolls off the tongue. Lola is the founder of the Brand Doula, which, love the name, by the way. It just really, I don't know, sparked a lot of really cool things from my brain. But the Brand Doula is a brand development studio, and they work to support visionary women own startups and create one-of-a-kind brands and customer experiences. Lola, thanks so much for joining us today. Would love to start just by a little bit more about your journey to starting your own business and how that's evolved over time.
Yes. So my story is a bit of a funny one. So I started as a freelancer in college. And so I kind of fell into it by accident, the world of brand design. I was a sophomore in college, and sophomore year is usually when you have to start looking for internships and getting some career experience. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was majoring in cognitive science, which, if you don't know, is basically a major for people who don't know what they want to do. So I was being confronted with a lot of questions at that point. And at that time, I was living my best kind of college blogger life. I was doing a little bit of content creation. So I thought, okay, of course, I want to be the editor-in-chief of Vogue eventually, or to start, we'll just start with Refinery 29. And so I was looking at, what are the jobs there? I saw things like brand partnerships and editorial. And then I kept seeing stuff that was brand design. And I was like, what is that? And I looked into it a little bit more. And simultaneously, while I was blogging, I kept coming across things like Squarespace templates and these studios who were creating basically visual identities and websites and all those things. So all of these things came together for me to realize that I really wanted to kind of bridge this idea of connecting with people on a mental and emotional level using, great aesthetics and visuals and stuff like that. So it was kind of the bridging of two worlds with cognitive science and my world as a content creator and lifestyle blogger. So I was yeah, I'm going to do a brand design internship. So I was okay, let's look at all the design agencies. And they're okay, submit your application and your portfolio. And I was my what? I had never actually designed that deeply or anything beyond messing around with my own website. So I was all right, you're not going to get an internship this year. So I actually went home, and with no internship, I decided I was going to create my own internship. So I basically planned out my own 3-month internship where I would learn brand design. And I just did a lot of YouTube. I'm self-taught. I'm a self-taught designer completely. So YouTube, Adobe Lives, anywhere I could get information, I would buy Squarespace templates and break them down and figure out how to recreate them. And I spent that entire summer becoming a brand designer. And then at that point, I was it's time to start practicing on some real brands. So I worked with friends and family. I tapped into my blogger community, and I was hey, do you want social media templates? I can create them for you. And in that process, I really loved it. I loved working with clients. Specifically, I loved working with Black women who were make up most of my community. And it was just Like I just did not even know like what was happening. I just knew I loved it. And actually since then I had never even thought of applying for a design agency job. I was like, I'm gonna run my own studio. I want to work specifically with like women of color, Black women. Like I just want to keep doing this. And so I did for the rest of my college career. And now I've been pursuing this like career of growing my own studio and working with women who really inspire me. So that's how I am
Yeah.
here now.
I love that. It is such an overlap with like cognitive science, and brand is so psychological that
Absolutely.
I totally see the tie in there. And I feel like you probably learn more in your own like internship boot camp than probably at one of those big places anyway, because I was so bored at an internship one time that I learned to code. So I was like, they probably would have put you on like a bunch of busy work anyway. And I'm definitely resonate with like the learn by doing sort of style. So one thing that I think is really interesting, and that there are like a lot of misconceptions around in terms of brand, is that people really feel or think that it's about the visual brand, like logos, colors, palettes, fonts, things like that. When you're talking to clients and sort of over the years of, you know, learning and growing your business, how do you sort of dispel that kind of misconception around like it's just about the look and feel, and help people sort of see the value of a deeper strategic branding exercise?
Ooh, that is a good question. A lot of arguing. No, I'm just kidding. I don't argue with clients. But it has taken a lot of education to generally like move the market to understanding that branding is a lot more than the visual elements of it. And I think the best way to think about it is through this idea of experiences that you're creating. So one thing that I always like to ask my clients like is to name a couple of their favorite brands and tell me why. And rarely ever will they ever say because I love their logo or like their color palette is so beautiful. Most often it'll be like amazing quality in their products, super great customer service. Their website was so easy to shop. I felt so connected to the content that they were putting out. All of these things are experiences and interactions that you have with the business. And that's what has helped build this perception in your head, this brand in your head. And so I try to tell my clients, your brand is not just your visual identity. That's a form of like, you know, a way that somebody can point you out on a shelf. But your brand is actually just your reputation. It's what somebody is going to say about, you know, if I was to ask, you know, somebody about Wethos, like, what would they say? That's your brand. So when I explain it that way, it starts to click for them, and then they start to think, okay, is my entire kind of customer journey there? Am I creating these good interactions all throughout the customer journey that are going to not only lead them to purchase, but also lead them to be loyal customers who have really great, you know, perceptions of my brand and will ultimately become advocates, which I say is our ultimate goal.
Yeah, that is such a good way to frame it to people, because like sometimes it's really hard to get that through with folks that are just like not as familiar with like what does it mean to really be a brand. And like I always say, like brand strategy is business strategy. Like it is about like who is your customer and why should they care?
Yes.
And what are you sort of giving to them? And I think the idea, you know, around like the experience and the what the brand does speaks volumes above like what the brand says it does or wants you to think. And we always used to have this argument, especially like early days of digital media, where it's like these days, like you don't really control your brand, your customers kind of control your brand and what they say about it.
Yep. I have a post exactly like that I was like, you actually, I know we say that we design brands for you, but like you actually don't really own your brand. You kind of only own the narrative that you're going to put out, and you have to let your customers decide what that brand is for them. It's something that the market owns, not necessarily that you can't say I have a brand and like you own it. So I totally agree.
100%. Yeah. And I think like the touch points along the way, like every single touch point with that customer speaks to that reputation that you're talking about, which I think is like so important. And especially like, man, customer success does not get enough love. Like that experience when things are going wrong for your customer is maybe the most important in my opinion. So I definitely hear you on that. So I was browsing around on your website and I noticed that you have like an amazing team that you're working with. I'd love to understand a little bit more about how the business operates. And, you know, if you are leveraging collaborators that are like full-time, that are sort of project-based, and like, how do you think about sort of like the packaging and pricing around, involving, I guess, more than
Mm-hmm.
one person. Because I know, you know, we talk to a lot of people who are independent or solo right now who are starting to scale up or thinking about scaling up, but they're not really sure, you know, how to start or where to start. Can you tell us a little bit more
Yeah.
about like how the business went
Cool.
from solo shop to, you know, having just such an amazing team?
I love this topic because oftentimes we think that teams come out of nowhere and you just one day are solo and then another day we have a team of six, and that's not exactly how that
Ta-da!
happened at all. I spent the first 3 years just doing it solo, freelance. It actually took me quite a while before I even contracted like once. My first outsourcing journey was with a VA, and that was the moment I was like confronted with like it's not just you hire someone and they're like a machine and they can just pick stuff up. You have to prepare lots of onboarding documents. You have to gain managerial skills, which is something that people often skip right over. If you want to build a team, like you have to, it's so much more than you just doing your job in your business. Like you become like a people person that you have to manage emotions and everything. So yeah, I had a VA and then I had 2 junior designers, and then I have since advanced to having more senior level designers and copywriters. So the journey was definitely incremental. I don't think that it makes a whole lot of sense to go from solo to having a ginormous team. It will be even so much more work than before. So the way my business is structured now, that especially now that we've since launched the Breakout brand package, in every client experience, we now have our experience designer, which is Wilda. So she kind of works on the broader, like the touch points and building that out. I serve as the brand strategist. So I come in at the very beginning, especially, and actually detail out what's the vision, what's the standard we're trying to set across all these experiences. And then we have our identity designer, who focuses on that visual identity piece, which then gets expressed through our touch points. And then we have our messaging strategists, our copywriters, who help, you know, get down the narrative portion of things. And then that's our core team. We also have developers and outer kind of external partners that we work with on a case-by-case basis. So we have Shopify, Squarespace developers, Webflow developers, illustrators, all of those things that are kind of go-to people. And these are all contractors. So I'm the only full-time employee in my company, and then the remaining are contractors. I also would be remiss to not mention Christine, who is kind of our community manager, and she mostly focuses on our course that we also have, which is called Brandland.
Yeah, that's amazing. You're totally right. Like, I think we don't talk about enough, like kind of the messy middle of like that first time you subcontract, or like that time that you subcontract and things got screwed up, or like, you know, you didn't like vet the person enough, or like I've made all of these mistakes.
Oh, me too. Me too. Your
and
first like firing or letting someone go, realizing that you didn't hire the right role, like you thought you needed, you know, one role, but actually that didn't free up any time at all, and so it was like a waste. So been there, done that.
Totally. I think everybody kind of goes through those like growing pains and like learning lessons, and I definitely agree that up front it's probably going to feel like more work to delegate until you get into like a flow and an operational system that makes sense. One thing that we really struggled with when we were scaling our, like, so my co-founder and I, we had a freelance business before we had the software company. That's how the software company came to be, is we built software for ourselves to help with the problem. And then we released it into the hands of now 43,000 freelance businesses, which is wild. But we had a big growing pain when we were scaling, which was around like, okay, when more people are involved and it's not a traditional agency where you have, you know, full-time employees and sort of like fixed costs, what do you charge the client? Who's getting what? How do you control the cash flow? So yeah, I'm curious, like, I love the packaging functionality that you have built into your website. And how did you sort of work through those packages and then like the pricing side of things when you're, you know, putting together a bigger scope of work like that?
Yes, I love this question because people often, like, pricing is the biggest conversation in the freelance world. And I have to admit, the single thing that like completely changed my view on pricing is when I grew my team, because I did not realize, one, just how much I was doing and how much I was underpaying for it because I was just one person. So I thought I couldn't charge that much, even though I was fulfilling the role of six. So when I was a freelancer, I was doing the exact same amount of work that I currently offer with a team, but charging, you know, probably more than 50% less than I do charge currently. And so with the contractors that I work with, they actually come with their own set rates. So we kind of have internal almost packages or quotes that they give me. So I have this menu of like, I know exactly how much brand strategy, like messaging costs. I know how much a visual identity costs, and I've been able to work out with them kind of a fixed rate. So that then allows me to offer a fixed rate to my clients. So when we have this fixed scope, like the breakout brand package, where everything aligns to a quote that my contractors have already given to me, then there's not that much like movement that has to happen with each quote that we give with our clients. So that has been the most convenient thing, but it absolutely made my prices go so far more up than I was working solo. So I think it's also helped me build just a greater perspective of how much it really takes to, you know, pull off an entire brand development process.
Yeah, plus with more people, you know, there's all that other time spent like managing and delegating
Yep.
and making sure people have what they need, and like those are billable hours, in my opinion.
That's the current thing that I just realized. I was like, I forgot to include project management fees, because now I'm like sitting here in Asana, like coordinating the timelines of 5 people at a time, and like scheduling meetings and making sure I respond and like getting to all of my different teammates and getting feedback to them and things. And I was like, this is yet another job on top of the job I'm trying to do as a brand strategist. So if I have one piece of advice while you're growing your business, is to also take into account the invisible hours, such as like admin and project management and all the things that it actually costs to even run things smoothly. So not just the people, but the system actually costs money, especially if you are the system.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think like we hear from people all the time who are using like our scoping templates, like, oh, I wasn't charging enough, mainly because I didn't realize I should have these things in my scope, like the time you spend on client calls, the time you spend project managing, the feedback rounds, like all these little things that you didn't realize, like, oh shoot, like I'm giving away free work right now. And it just doesn't occur until like, I think more people come into the picture. We had the same exact thing. We were like, oh my God, like we are spending a lot of time on all of this stuff that's really actually valuable to the client, keeps things moving, but we're not actually billing for it. And so we did the same thing where we had like that fixed sort of internal package project cost. Then we'd mark up by like, maybe depending on if it was a nonprofit or a for-profit or what, you know, the sort of client, we'd mark up by like 20 to 50%, I would say. So like internal, the package is 10 grand. When you sell it, it's like 12 or 15 grand. And then anything in between, like left, basically was our profit margin. And that was essentially like the simplest way basically that we could think about it.
Yeah, that's currently how we're doing it. We have like so I have all of my contractor rates factored into the base cost. And then so the part that I forgot was to include a project manager fee. I just did a 30% markup from all of the contractor costs plus kind of my role as a brand strategist. And then I was like, oh, then 30% profit. And then now I'm realizing for one time is money. So cut that profit a little bit in half to include the project management fees. And now we're closer maybe to like 10% profit, even though like maybe the bank account is looking healthy, but I'm not looking healthy because I didn't account for that time. So that's kind of where we are now. So I'm actually curious if you have like kind of your simple version, how did you end up evolving the way of working with contractors or your team?
Yeah, so what we found eventually was that it was interesting because like we were also the only full-time employees, like my co-founder and I. And then most of the teams that because we were putting together like multiple teams for different clients, and we were really leaning into like, we'll curate the perfect team for you basically, and kind of like leaning more into that. And then as it evolved over time, what we realized was if we're going to bring people on full-time in-house, the best roles to do that with are either project management, because one project manager could be on, you know, several different teams at once, and that would make up for it. And then it would be easier to determine what to actually bill for project management. It could be more like a flat instead of like maybe a sliding scale, because more people, more problems, more project management. And then the other role that we found was really great to bring in-house when we got to that point of like having, you know, enough monthly income that we could do it, is account management. Because what we found in sales was, you probably experience this too, like people probably fall in love with you in sales, like that first call. And then if you want to like put a team together and then like you can't work on the business and in the business all the time, right? And so trying to pass that relationship off to someone else like is really tough, because what you're doing is you're trying to pass like trust on from you to someone else, and that's kind of weird. And so like most agencies, you know, I always joke, I'm like, you get pitched by an agency for new business by like the chief creative officer, and then like you will never see that dude again, because he's not the one actually working on it. So in reality, like if you're not delicate about it, then it can feel like a bait and switch. But so what we did was we had like 1 or 2 account managers who again could be across several different clients at once, and then we would introduce those like team leads as soon or as early in the sales process as possible. So like right after that discovery call, we would be like, here, we're looping in your team lead, and that would help like them not get too attached to like me literally doing the work, and it enabled us to scale a little bit easier as more clients were coming in the door and not trying to like call me all the time for everything. And I'm like, you can talk to your team lead now.
That right there, like that breakdown of how you worked through that is literally customer and brand experience. That like consciousness of like at this touch point, we know that customers have gotten accustomed to whoever was like the account manager or whoever like did that sales pitch, and it would be kind of a bad experience, or it has been a bad experience currently in the market, to then just pass them off to their real team without fostering some kind of like great transition. And so you're like thinking a better experience that we can actually make kind of our signature experience is this really smooth transition into the actual project with the team you're working on. So I'm obsessed with that, but also I'm dealing with this right now where I'm like, do I need to have an account manager now at this point? Because now I'm struggling with balancing marketing and sales and all those things. And so maybe it's time to advance that more CEO role and have somebody else to manage that. So I also really loved hearing how you ended up solving that problem of that trust piece. Through the customer journey.
I think too, it was interesting because, you know, depending on the client, like if it's project based, like it's a big project or something, a team lead for them makes sense. And then even that team lead could be contract. If it's a client that is either on retainer or, you know, continues to come back, like you don't want to switch people up on them all the time because they get all freaked out about it, and they want to have somebody that they like really trust and can like call up and do that and feel like, you know, they have a go-to. And so that's when we started to transition a little bit more into like a few full-time folks who were helping to manage that process. I think scaling the sales process probably was the toughest thing to figure out. Once we figured out like where, to your point, the right time was to sort of like hand that baton off, which is not once a contract is signed.
It sounds like you learned a hard lesson.
Yeah, because there is like a stigma, right? And the reason I think we don't really talk about this as like agency owners or like freelancers is because there's a stigma around it. It's like, oh, you're subcontracting, or you're passing me off to somebody. But what people don't really understand is like a service-based business, the only way to scale that is more people provide services. And so this is how the business runs. Like this is how it works. And I think that the better we were able to frame that up front to them and frame it as like, no, this is an amazing team lead. Here's why, here's your perfect team. And being able to sort of like transition through that process up front made things go a lot smoother, and it helped differentiate us too. I think, because I bet in a traditional agency, you are just going to feel like kind of baited and switched, which is just like not great. So I was looking through your package builder, which I thought was awesome, and might be having a little tool coming for you soon that could help with like spitting out some packages, prices, things like that.
Thank you. I've been looking for something.
There is nothing yet, but there will be soon.
Please hit me up as soon as it's available.
For sure. But I am like curious because, you know, a lot of people, I think, especially when they're first starting out, you know, we do this too. We're like kind of take any project that comes across the desk, like just get it out the door and build up that reputation, etc. Eventually you get to a point where you start saying no, which I always say is like an amazing growth inflection point. Like to say no is the dream as a business owner. Can you help us understand a little bit more about how you honed in on who your real like target customer is? I noticed you had some language on your site that was like, we recommend you're in business for at least a year before you approach us, which I think is super important. Not building from zero, you know, like how did you sort of hone in on that target customer? And then how do you handle requests when people do come in that are sort of like outside of your target?
Yeah. Okay. So honing in on our target audience, it's been a journey. And so one thing that I don't want to communicate out is that you won't spend a amount of time exploring what your niche is. And when I first started, I started out fairly broad. I took on all the projects that came my way and learned what I didn't like, and especially learned what to say no to. And so this is 4 years in the making of me deciding that after working through all kinds of businesses that I really want to focus on startups. Now, the reason why I have moved to working more with kind of the startup framework of businesses is because they stand to benefit the most from this kind of intense brand development process. And so there were some points where I would work through this kind of brand development process for a business that was less than 1 year old, and you run into a number of problems with that. One, it's unaffordable if you actually charge what you should be charging to a business that has not yet seen revenue. So usually if you're under 1 year, it's pretty rare to be like extremely profitable and make an investment that's actually going to get returns. And the second thing is that when you are green like that, under a year in business, you're actually probably still defining product market fit. You're still validating products. You're still defining your target audience. You cannot actually build like a brand that's going to last a long time without having these things already established. And so I was like, it's kind of a little bit of a waste of time. And I found that a lot of clients who are going through this large process, sometimes they don't even fully launch. Sometimes their business peters out after a while because they realize they need to explore a different avenue. They have some audience insight that's like, we need to change the product. We need to pivot our messaging and everything. And all of that material essentially goes to waste. So I believe that kind of first year is a time to make smaller investments. I'm not vain enough to say that you should never like DIY your brand for the first go around or work with a cheaper, not cheaper, but like kind of lower investment designer when you first start out and work your way up to a $25,000 package. I will never pitch to a beginner client that they need to be investing this large amount of money and promise that will be successful for them. So that's how I arrived at that target audience, was kind of realizing that I would be doing a disservice if I continued to kind of take on clients who would not be the best fit for the service that I wanted to provide. Before that, though, when we did have, there were still kind of clients that we would say no to. I think generally we kind of say no to if it still felt like there was not really a strong business idea behind it, or it didn't kind of align with our values. And then now that we have this kind of one package service, we definitely get more clients who are looking for like just a website or just something else. And we kind of gently direct them to another designer who might be a best fit. We have pretty like kind of a short list of trusted studios and designers that we refer them to. And I will also note that we're in a little bit of a transition phase. And so we're hoping to kind of build out our service ladder still. So we have this more like this breakout brand package that's kind of super intense, but we do plan on having a little bit of more of those lower investment services in the long run, hopefully by the end of the year, to serve those clients as well.
Yeah, I feel like, oh man, there was like so many learnings in there to even like dig into. I heard the term like product market fit, which I think is something that I learned about in entering the tech world. Can you break that down a little bit for folks who might not be, who might not be as familiar? Like, how do you think? Because product market fit's like a weird thing. I'm like, when you find, it's like finding love. When you know, you know.
Yeah.
Like, how do you define, or how do you think about like what it means to have product market fit?
Yeah, that's so funny. I expose myself. I am a product marketer at Google, so the tech word is coming out. Yeah, so product market fit is a little bit of a step that I find people skipping over, especially in this what I call like the next generation of business owners, where you have lots of mixes between those who are doing like a lifestyle business and really like in business just to get kind of financial freedom and things, and they're not necessarily going down that normal entrepreneurial route where maybe for you, for example, you identified this problem and you aim to solve it with Wethos. So the way I define product market fit is that you have correctly identified a gap within the market that your product can fill, and you have shaped the product to solve a particular problem. So what that helps you do is actually create this compelling narrative around why somebody needs a product, and you have a specific audience that it's going to fit that need. So it's almost to me another word for niching down, but
Mm.
also like going a step further by actually making sure you're serving that niche. So you've kind of proven product market fit when you can prove interest and demand in a particular product that you've put out. And it's a very important part of like the actual product validation period. So we don't we don't see as much of that happening today, but I really try to encourage my clients and everyone to make sure you're like grounding the products you're creating in actual like market and audience insights. So if you can articulate correctly, what's the gap you're seeing in your market? How does your product fill this? And then prove with maybe like sales, or you've done some kind of survey or something to prove that this is, you've shaped the product correctly for the audience. You've kind of proven product market fit.
Totally. And I think to that end, like price point totally comes into play here.
Absolutely.
Because I've seen a lot of people get sort of close, which is like right target audience, right value proposition that solves their pain point, totally wrong pricing structure, or totally wrong price point that like this customer can't afford to pay that much, or this customer feels like that price point might be too good to be true. Like I feel like that the validation around, you know, the sales and the growth of also just like people coming back and the conversion around that stuff is another just like really important factor that I think not enough people take a step back to continue to explore, which is like, oh, like maybe we're doing these two things right, and then but like maybe the price point isn't quite right, and those variables are super challenging to work through.
And that's such an interesting topic, especially in the freelancer world, when pricing is so tricky, but it's also rarely like it's hard to ground your pricing in like cost of materials, for example, and then like do your regular upcharge. And so we see a lot of people who are like, oh, I see that this person is charging 10K, so I need to be charging 10K. And it doesn't coordinate at all with like the problem they're trying to solve or the niche they're in. And so you get a lot of these misaligned kind of services with pricing that's just trying to be as kind of competitive or as high as possible. And I'm of the mind frame that you don't have to be the most expensive in the market. You can have a very successful business if you're targeting, say, for example, that less than 1 year business, and you frame your services and your pricing around what makes sense to them. You will probably have more customers than if you say, I serve less than 1 year businesses, but I charge 20,000 for my services. So like, it's not always about that kind of vanity metric of I charge the highest in my industry. It's about I have the best fit for my audience.
Yes. I love that you brought that up, because I think a lot of people, because of what we've been told for forever, try to put the price tag on like themselves, like, hey, this is how much I cost. When in reality, so much of it comes down to like, who is the client? What is the value you're providing to the client? How big are they? Maybe even where are they located? What, like, how high of a priority is this initiative for this client? Like, you know, am I talking to the director of marketing, or am I talking to an associate? Like, and I think that in navigating through those things, it really becomes clear that like the pricing strategy for services in particular, I think has to be sort of like tailored in that way. And I think that assessing the type of project and client itself is a huge, like almost all of that comes down to that, right? It's like totally, I have run into in fact, nonprofits, we used to run into this issue a lot. And I think a lot of folks who work with nonprofits do too. Like clearly there's a need there. Clearly they need help communication, et cetera. But, you know, what can they afford is a different question. And so I think that can be tough. And I've heard of a lot of people sort of subsidizing that work with, you know, landing a bigger brand client, charging a lot more, and then being able to sort of subsidize the work that way. But business is hard.
It's tough.
For sure. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about transparency, because I think the way that you've laid out the process on your website is amazing. And I think that there is this old school belief that I hear all the time, because, you know, when we publish pricing data, in effect, like it's somewhat of a radical act, honestly, a radical act of transparency, really. And I'm curious, like, there is this old school belief where, you know, you want to keep things sort of shrouded in mystery, especially around the process, or like it loses the magic, like that Mad Men era sort of agency stuff, you know?
Yeah.
But I was curious, like, can you help us understand how transparency may have helped you grow your business? And if so, like, have you ever been sort of worried about, you know, revealing the secret sauce, and how did you sort of overcome that, if that were the case?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So I have, for one, so 4 years of business means that I have probably changed my like strategy around, do I post my pricing or do I not post my pricing, so many times. And I finally arrived at just putting it all out there based on audience insights. So when I was building this package, I was reflecting on a lot of the like consultation calls that I've had in the past. The number one thing that clients or potential clients were looking for was like, how much do you freaking cost? Like, as a business owner, I am here to make good financial decisions. And I think we have kind of set up this sort of like punk situation where we're like, we want you to be a smart business owner, but at the same time, we're going to make it as hard as possible to do so by never telling you the price until the absolute last minute. And so I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, that's not a good customer experience. Like, if you are going into to like make a big financial investment, you want to know how much it is so that you can assess, like, do I have the budget? If I don't have the budget, what do I need to do to get the budget, etc. So I was like, you know what, enough with these mind games and all of this kind of these different schools of thought. I'm just going to post my pricing like you would see in any product-based experience. So that was my rationale behind that. I also definitely like post the entire scope that you're getting, just because I did want there to be absolute clarity on like, how does this translate to such a big ticket cost? So the other thing that people want to know is like, okay, if something costs this much, what is the value that I'm getting out of it? So I write out the scope very clearly. And yeah, this was all based on what would be the best customer experience, like what will be the most intuitive for them. And there are moments where I think there are certain sacrifices that I understand that I'm making when doing that. Like, for one, a lot of people do not post their pricings because they believe that they can, kind of persuade the client a little bit more through consultation calls. When you post your pricing publicly, you don't necessarily have that opportunity to be like, wait, don't leave. Like, I promise we're worth it. The client kind of decides that for themselves. And so that was like something that I had to really get comfortable with, and I'm still getting comfortable with, is, okay, if that's going to happen, I need to do a much better job on my marketing side to already like kind of pre-sell the client on them and explain that value, because I'm not going to have that consultation call piece to really massage them before I show the price. So it's like absolutely a vulnerable decision, in my opinion, and one that I know that there are people who are coming to my website, they're like, oh, I can't afford that, and they're leaving. And I think that's okay, because I have a particular niche and I have priced according to that niche and what's going to be affordable to them. So on the flip side, what gives me encouragement is that we're kind of creating this more intuitive and clear customer journey where those who don't fit in it already know that they don't fit in it, and they're not going to spend extra time in a place that they don't belong or that it's not going to be fitting for them. And those who already kind of are in that market and best fit for the product can more easily see that and get started with their customer journey. So there's definitely both. I think when you do anything vulnerable, like, it's going to be scary, and you're going to have to kind of just move through that. So that's how I aligned on or arrived kind of at this super clear packaging and pricing.
Yeah, I love that. I think too, like, the idea that you're sort of like helping people kind of pre-vet themselves even, and I could not agree more. Like, from a client side perspective, the number one thing people want to know is like, just tell me how much it's going to cost. So I just give me a gut check, even if it's just a range, like 10 to 12
starting
packages
number,
are like 10 to 12K, something. And it's like that Spider-Man meme where, like, it's like chicken and egg. It's like, well, what's your budget? Well, what's your rate? And it's just a really hard thing to navigate. And I feel like, at least for us, like, so the database that we have on Wethos actually started with our own data. That's our own pricing data from our own scopes.
And I love those posts. I love the transparency behind them.
Yeah, thank you. I think what we've heard, and we're actually about to push out a bunch of case studies, we've just heard tremendous value in people being able to understand, like, generally, what are people charging for this? And the thing is like, in no other industry do you shoot in the dark like this. Like, if you sell products, if you sell books, like, how how much books cost, right? And so it's not like a mystery. But I think because there's this sort of legacy, like, employer-employee dynamic sort of tied into this, explicitly, people don't really want freelancers to be sharing their rates and talking about it, because that's collective action at the end of the day, right? Like, if we all agree we are not charging anything less than this for these things, then clients can't shop around saying like, hey, if you won't do it for $5, I'll find somebody who will. That's not good. That's a race to the bottom.
Truth.
And I just think, like, I also found that in the business end, when I was talking to your clients, we did the exact same thing, where if not before the first phone call, like right after the first phone call, we provided a general quote, and we were like, this is about what it's going to be, or even on that phone call. And that reduced the amount of time that we were spending chasing leads that weren't serious, because
Absolutely.
just because they can afford it doesn't mean they're actually taking you seriously or taking the work seriously. And so that doesn't mean they're willing to actually spend that money. And I think we just ran down a lot of dead end leads where we just spent so much time trying to fit into their, puzzle piece, when in reality, like, what we really needed to do is what we started doing, which was like saying no and telling people up front, like, here's what the cost is, thinking about it, because then also they can focus on, like, here's how we're going to solve the problem that you're having, and less on like, God, I can't wait for this random price tag to drop, like, hope it's not crazy, and $30,000 invoice that is just like a lump sum. It didn't really work well for us, because also, like, there's an assumption of trust built into that. Like, if people will buy a mystery package for 30 grand, it's likely that they already like know you, or they got referred to you, or there's some built-in trust there. Otherwise, they want to really understand, like, how does this break down? What is the work that goes into it? And it really helps, like, educate the client and hold their hand, sort of guide them along, of like, yeah, it's a lot of work to do a brand. It's not just make the logo pretty. Editing, auditing the market, and auditing competitors, and auditing your social channels, and like, there's just so much more that goes into it. And so I think I just really appreciate that you do that. And I think that, generally speaking, like, my goal obviously is to like move us all in that direction, because I'm ready to start a movement around this.
Please, I'm here with you. Another thing I'll also add is you can play the long game. So I have had a number of clients who, they first see my pricing and they come back a year later and they're ready to book. So just because somebody visits at one point in time and cannot afford it at that point in time does not mean that they won't later. And so it's so much nicer to not like accidentally kind of burn these bridges by creating poor experiences, by like springing pricing on them and then making them feel bad if they can't afford it, and trying to chase them down when it's like, okay, they can see the pricing and like, I would love to work with the brand doula, but it's not my time now, and I can come back, and I like know with confidence that when I come back, I can't afford it. So if you're like ever scared, just know that you can play long game. Like, some customers are on year-long journeys while some are on much shorter journeys. So don't be afraid to like trust kind of that people will come back.
Yeah, totally. And I love to use language like, I totally understand it's not a good fit at this time. If we want to circle back next quarter or next year, or whatever it is, like that, because I know like sometimes having those conversations can be really like tricky, and sometimes people don't have like the language to say no, or to help people say no,
or just like not right now.
Like maybe later. Not a good fit at this time. So last question here, which is something that I ask everybody. There are a lot of folks out there right now who might be thinking about taking the leap to freelance. Maybe they've already started to dabble. In fact, recently, maybe they are being sort of shoved into freelance, not by choice. There's a lot of layoffs going on, not great.
Yeah.
Any advice for folks who are looking to take the leap to start that freelance business?
Ooh. I mean, when I would say do it, I think if it's not like a layoff situation, I think it's definitely helpful to have a little bit of cushion if you can. So there may be a little bit of overlap between your full-time job and your freelance job, and that's okay. My biggest piece of advice that I've learned is you don't always have to scale. Like, it's not always, I think like capitalism orients us towards thinking that the only way to like successfully do business is to constantly scale and grow. And sometimes that's unsustainable and it's not manageable, like according to the lifestyle you want to live. Like, I'm currently talking about like, oh my gosh, I need to hire a project manager and an account manager and be the CEO. Like, that's a lot of work. And I don't want anybody to believe that you need to do all of that in order to be successful as a freelancer. So it's absolutely okay to be solo. You will have a thriving business with that too. And the second thing I would kind of give you advice for is to focus more on the client and the customer experience than what you're seeing around you. So again, like, don't get distracted by those vanity metrics, people touting high prices and, certain clientele. Like, it's most important that you are really crafting a service, an amazing experience that's for the people that you are serving. your competitors are not your customers. Their opinions do not matter. But the opinions of your clients and your customers do matter. So focus on what's going to be, that product market fit idea. Like focus on creating that service and refining and making your journey about making the best possible service that you can for the niche that you've decided to be in. From there, things are amazing.
I love that. Yeah. And just for the record, I totally side hustled. I totally was freelancing while with a full-time job just to like get my feet wet before I went full-time freelance. And I think that piece at the end is super, super important. Like I always tell our team, like, it's fine to keep your eye on the competition, but at the end of the day, like our only competition is ourselves. Like we just need to be better than we were yesterday or the week before, or the month before, or the year before. And as long as we're doing that, then we are making strides. And I think like, I love that you brought up the sort of, understanding what success means to you personally. And it doesn't have to be growth. Mm-hmm. We're actually going to publish a case study soon where one of the users of our platform earned like way more money than she was earning. And with that, she got to take her first vacation since 2019 with her husband. So like, it's stuff like that I love to hear about, like, what are you doing with the time back, or what are you doing with the extra money? And it doesn't always have to be reinvest in the business and grow. It can be like, go take a vacation, girl.
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate that. Lola, thank you so much for joining us. If people want to find you or follow along, where can they do that? And can you tell us if you've got anything like fun or exciting coming up that maybe we should keep our eyes out for?
Yeah. Okay. So first you can find me at the Brand Doula on Instagram, and thebranddoula.co is my website. We have one very fun thing launching. Our course is coming back in mid-August. So if you want to learn more from me, I pretty much dump my entire brain into this course on building a brand from scratch. And we come from the perspective of building these experiences. So in the time that you're building a brand, you're also kind of building up your entire business throughout building that customer journey. So it's an amazing experience. I definitely recommend looking out for that. It's called Brandland. And you can find out more about what we're doing on our Instagram. We always update that channel first. So it's been really great. And
this has honestly been a great preview of that, like how that course is going to come together. Because I feel like we talked about a lot of awesome things that people could really, really learn from. So we'll definitely keep an eye out for that. And we'll probably link in the posting of this once it's up and ready for people to go check it out. Because
amazing.
A lot of awesome things. Well, thank you again so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Loved the conversation. And just for folks out there who are joining us, we'll be back not next week, but the following week with next episode of The Leap. We're going to be talking strategist. So like pure strategist freelancer, which is a very interesting place to be. But have a great night, everybody. And Lola, I'm really looking forward to staying in touch and following along. And thanks again for joining us.
Me too. Thanks everyone for watching. Bye.
Have a good night.